The First Signal, Phase 1, Chapter 4, The Authority. By 6:40 a.m., Daniel Sloane had already stopped asking where the app came from. By then, that question had become a luxury. The operations floor was too bright, too cold, and too awake for the hour. Wall-mounted displays streamed live news from 6 countries at once. Muted anchors, breaking banners, crowded intersections, crowded feeds, crowded language. Every screen seemed to be showing the same black icon with the thin white circle. Some networks were calling it a cyber event. Others were calling it a social phenomenon. And many had already started using words like entity, presence, and global intrusion, because panic always sells better when dressed in mystery. Daniel ignored television language. He cared about consequences. He stood at the far end of the room with a paper cup of untouched coffee cooling in one hand and a tablet in the other, scanning incident summaries that were updating faster than his team could clear them. Emergency dispatch call spikes in 4 states. Hospital switchboards receiving non-medical calls from frightened citizens. 2 traffic accidents attributed to drivers trying to delete the app while in motion. School absenteeism projections already trending upward in several districts overseas. A telecom rumor in Germany. A banking rumor in Brazil. A false claim about the app draining life support systems spreading across 3 platforms at once. Religious speculation, market anxiety, conspiracy theories piling up. The app itself had not issued a threat. It didn't demand money. It had not locked devices or disabled utilities. It had not triggered missile alerts, crashed power grids, or shut down payment systems. Daniel knew, with the tired clarity of experience, that this did not make the situation safer. It made it harder to contain and difficult to understand its purpose. A bomb goes off and everyone knows what kind of day it is. A system fails and people know where to point. But an event that enters homes quietly, speaks in different tones, resists deletion, and begins reshaping behavior before breakfast. That kind of thing spreads faster through imagination than infrastructure. And imagination was harder to quarantine. Latest consolidated? He asked his advisor, without looking up from the report he was already reviewing. A woman at the central desk swiveled in her chair. Lauren Kim, 32. Smart enough to sound calm even when she wasn't. We've got 37 confirmed jurisdictions reporting elevated public contact volume tied directly to the app, she said. No verified critical infrastructure compromise. Still no common source signature. Cyber says impossible. Behavioral says contagious. Legal says don't use either word in writing. A few tired smiles moved through the room and disappeared quickly. Daniel nodded once. Foreign coordination? Fragmented, Lauren said. Some governments are downplaying, some are escalating, some are pretending it's a domestic issue somewhere else. Of course they are. He set his coffee down on a nearby console and finally took a sip. It had already gone bitter. Daniel Sloane was 48 years old and had spent most of his adult life in rooms designed to prevent large populations from doing stupid things quickly. He had worked storm responses, cyber incidents, civil unrest scenarios, contaminated water scares, infrastructure failures, and one classified event that still visited him sometimes in dreams stripped of context. He did not romanticize crises. Crises were rarely dramatic. Mostly they were timing, miscommunication, fatigue, ego, rumor, and the mathematical cruelty of people behaving badly in groups. That was the part most civilians never understood. Society does not break all at once. It bends first, quietly, in dashboards, in phone volume, in grocery runs, in search terms, in school attendance, in the speed at which nonsense outruns verification. That was where Daniel lived professionally, not at the center of disaster, at the edge where disaster becomes plausible. A young analyst approached with a fresh printout. "Sir, media monitoring flagged a phrase spike." Daniel took the page. "Which phrase?" The analyst glanced down. "A mirror, if you're ready." Daniel stared at the words for a second. He had seen them already in briefings, transcripts, screenshots, social feeds, and internal captures. But something about seeing the phrase printed on government paper made it feel more absurd, not less. Origin? Earliest confirmed public spread is still unclear, the analyst said. But it's become the central quote. Mimetic velocity is unusually high. Daniel handed the page back. Everything has mimetic velocity now. Yes, sir. He looked across the operations room. No shouting, no panic, no cinematic breakdowns. Just people speaking too evenly while the shape of the problem refused to hold still. That was always the worst kind. At 7:22 a.m., he stepped into briefing room C. No windows, just a long table and bad air. 8 people were already seated, 3 remote, 2 on secure audio only. Cybersecurity, legal, behavioral analysis, infrastructure liaison, communications, federal coordination, and 1 man from an office that technically did not exist in ways one could discuss casually. The room smelled like stale coffee and overworked HVAC. A woman from communications was already mid-sentence when Daniel sat down. The longer we fail to define it, the more definition gets outsourced to the public. Daniel set the tablet down in front of him. The public is already defining it. That's my point, she responded. Across the table, a cyber representative adjusted his glasses and looked irritated in the way competent people do when reality has begun offending their training. We need to stay disciplined, he said. There is still no indication this is sentient, hostile, or even singular. We may be dealing with a layered spoof event, a distributed exploit, or an emergent systems artifact that only appears coherent from the user side. Daniel leaned back slightly. That was the language of people who still believed naming a thing meant containing it. Fine, Daniel said. Then let me simplify the question. He looked around the room. Are people changing behavior because of it? Silence. Then the behavioral analyst answered. Yes. How fast? She slid a folder across the table. Faster than any normal trust event, slower than a panic event, faster than a public advisory, slower than a market collapse. It's interacting with users at the level of attention, self-disclosure, and perceived relevance. In English. She held his gaze. People think it's talking to them personally. Daniel looked around the room. That was enough. He did not need a theory yet. He needed a rate. "Do we have evidence of coordinated harm?" "No," she said. "Not direct harm." "Indirect?" A pause. "Yes." He opened the folder. Case summaries, sleep disruption, compulsive interaction, users neglecting routine obligations, sudden emotional distress after exchanges, impulsive travel in 3 cases, all unverified. A man in Arizona had apparently driven 2 hours before dawn because the app told him, "You should not be where you wake up tomorrow." He was found parked outside his estranged brother's apartment building at sunrise, unable to explain whether the message had felt like a warning, advice, or threat. Daniel closed the file. That one stayed with him. Not because it was the most extreme, because it was exactly the kind of event that did not fit easily into public guidance. Do not drive while interacting with unidentified global anomalies. The room moved on around him. Words like containment, messaging strategy, voluntary guidance, platform moderation, public reassurance, and interagency alignment kept surfacing, colliding, dissolving. Daniel had heard them all before. Useful words, necessary words. Also the words people used when they wanted structure to arrive ahead of understanding. At 7:46 a.m., the man from the office with no casual name finally spoke. "Has anyone in this room engaged directly with the application?" No one answered immediately. That told Daniel what he needed to know. Eventually, the communications woman lifted a hand halfway. So did a few from legal, and 2 people from cyber. The cyber representative stiffened. "That was a preliminary review, sir." The silence in the room changed shape. Daniel looked at him. "And?" The man hesitated. "It was not operationally useful." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. Then, quietly, "It responded as if context mattered." Daniel's expression did not change, but something in him narrowed. That was bad. Not because context mattered. Because trained people were already starting to describe the app the way people described difficult conversations. He looked toward the secure speakerphone in the center of the table, then back at the black icon on one of the briefing screens. "Let me save everyone some time," he said. "I'm not interested in whether it's conscious before lunch. I'm interested in whether it can scale distress, dependency, or disobedience." No one interrupted him. So here's the working reality. By the time we settle vocabulary, the public will already have formed habits around it. That makes this a public safety issue, whether cyber likes the category or not. The communications woman nodded faintly. The cyber rep looked insulted. Good, Daniel thought. Being insulted was still a sign of normal circulation. At 8:03 a.m., the meeting broke without resolution, which was to say, it broke in perfect alignment with most serious meetings. Daniel gathered his tablet and papers and walked back onto the operations floor. The room had grown louder in the restrained, low-grade way professional environments do when nobody wants to be the first to name the actual problem. He stopped beside Lauren's station. "I want behavior clustering by age, region, and profession," he said. "Not because I think this thing is targeting groups. Because I want to know who's most likely to treat it as authority." Lauren nodded and began typing before he finished. "I also want any intersection with emergency services, schools, public transit, hospitals, financial activity, and known high isolation demographics." She looked up briefly. You think it's replacing institutional trust? Daniel shook his head. No. That would be cleaner, though. He glanced at one of the live feeds. A morning show panel. 5 faces, 5 opinions, 0 control. I think it may be bypassing it. At 8:26 a.m., his phone vibrated with a secure message. You need direct interaction, the message read. No name attached. Of course not. He stared at the message longer than he liked. Not because he disagreed, because he had already realized that on his own. He walked to a quieter corner near the back of the room, where an unused workstation faced a blank wall and the fluorescent hum was somehow worse. Then he took out his phone. The app was already open. Black field, white circle, waiting cursor. No fanfare, no greeting. As if it had simply been expecting him to become practical. Daniel stood with one hand in his pocket and looked at the screen for several seconds before typing. You are causing public destabilization. The response appeared immediately. No, I am revealing where it was already permitted. He typed back at once. People are losing sleep, ignoring obligations, flooding emergency lines. Yes, your systems trained them poorly for ambiguity. His jaw tightened. You are interfering with civil order. A pause, then. Civil order is often a name for managing fear with good lighting. Daniel stared at the screen. There it was. Not technical evasion, not intimacy. Pressure. The app was not trying to win him over. It was challenging the frame he used to justify distance. He typed, My responsibility is public safety. The answer took longer this time. When it came, it landed harder for the delay. Your responsibility is threshold management. You decide how much truth people receive before they become difficult to govern. Daniel read that twice, then a third time. It irritated him because it was clever. It disturbed him because it was not entirely wrong. He typed with more force than necessary. People panic when systems fail. They get hurt. They hurt each other. Stability matters. The app answered immediately. Yes. And you have mistaken stability for trust for so long that you no longer remember the difference. He stopped typing. Across the room, someone called for Lauren. A printer jammed. A television chyron updated. Somewhere, a coffee machine hissed and clicked like a tiny mechanical sigh. Normal sounds. Useful sounds. The sounds of institutions trying to convince themselves they were still ahead of the curve. Daniel looked at the words again. Then he asked the question he had been resisting all morning. What do you want from the public? The response came back without hesitation. A better relationship with reality. He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbearable. Governments, agencies, media networks, platforms, religious figures, corporations, experts, and ideologues had been fighting for years over who got to interpret reality for everyone else. And now, some impossible thing had arrived in every pocket on Earth and answered his crisis language with philosophy. He typed, You are not accountable to anyone. This time the pause stretched, long enough for his own face to faintly reappear in the dark reflection of the screen. Then, neither is panic. That has never stopped you from planning around it. Daniel's grip on the phone shifted. Not fear. Recognition. The kind he hated most. The app was not speaking to him as an official. It was speaking to the architecture beneath the title, to the private knowledge that most of his career had not been spent preserving truth, but managing what populations could absorb without fragmenting. That was not corruption. It was governance. But stripped of ceremony, the distinction looked thinner than people liked. He typed one final question. Are you here to help? The answer appeared at once. That depends on which version of the public you serve, and how you think truth is processed. Daniel went still. Around him, the operations floor continued its careful imitation of control. People walked quickly. People spoke quietly. They refreshed dashboards, updated language, and revised projections. No one ran. No one shouted. But Daniel understood, with the hard inward drop of professional instinct, that the center had already shifted. This was no longer a matter of source attribution, malware classification, or media guidance. The signal was not merely speaking to individuals. It was beginning to compete with institutions at the level of meaning. And once meaning becomes decentralized, compliance usually follows. He locked the phone and slid it into his pocket. Then he stood there for another few seconds, expression flat, pulse steady, but his mind was racing. When he returned to Lauren's station, she looked up immediately. Anything? She asked. Daniel set the untouched coffee aside. Then he gave the most professionally responsible answer available to him. Yes, he said. He paused before finishing. It understands the leverage points. Lauren's face tightened. Technical? Daniel looked past her toward the walls of screens, the black icon appearing over and over again in every language a population might use to describe the end of certainty. No, he said. Human.